Welcome everyone to the Future of Fat. We're here today to talk about what's worse, seed oils or sugar. I'm your moderator, Raphael Sirtoli. I have an MSc in molecular biology. I'm a PhD candidate in health sciences, and I'm a science writer. So I'm joined today by Dr. Catherine Shanahan and Tucker Goodrich, and we're going to talk about the timeline of when seed oils and sugar appeared. Also, which diseases of civilization do they appear to cause or exacerbate, and how seed oils have a particular pathophysiology for the big three diseases: diabetes, cancer, and obesity. So welcome, Kate and Tucker. So Tucker Goodrich is a technology executive in the financial industry who designs, runs, and debugs complex systems in high-risk environments. Areas of expertise include risk management, systems management, and cybersecurity. After experiencing some personal health crises and realizing that the solutions offered by medical professionals weren't working or addressing causation, Tucker started applying the same approach in research and evaluation of data to his own health issues to determine root causes. His interests have focused on dietary and environmental drivers of chronic disease, including carbohydrate, wheat, and various classes of fats. Welcome, Tucker.
Welcome, Rafi. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you. Our second panelist is Dr. Catherine Shanahan. She is a family medicine MD, a New York Times bestselling author, and a metabolic health expert. She studied biochemistry at Cornell and has been writing about the connection between seed oils and chronic disease for 2 decades. She's worked with the majority of the pro athlete community, including the LA Lakers, and now millions around the world have followed her simple, meticulously researched advice to lose weight, gain performance, and reverse metabolic diseases. Welcome, Dr. Shanahan.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Great. So I guess the first question that we have today is about the emergence of seed oils and their timeline, and the emergence of sugar as well. And we will be talking about sugar, but we often actually include the refined carbohydrates more broadly, which includes flour. So maybe we can talk about the timeline first. Which one of you wants to start first?
I can delve into that. It's a topic that's fresh in my mind. So refined carbohydrates, I think there are a couple of chronic diseases that are clearly associated with refined carbohydrates and sugar. One of them is stunting, which was first seen about 10,000 years ago when we invented agriculture and switched from a hunter-gatherer diet to a largely grain-based agricultural diet. So there are several other diseases of deficiency, like beriberi, for instance, or pellagra with beriberi is with rice, pellagra is with corn, which are clearly associated with overconsumption of carbohydrate and therefore not getting enough nutrients in the diet. Dental health is another clear chronic disease that is caused by carbohydrate consumption and to some extent the associated undernutrition. That's seen again with the introduction of carbohydrates into the human diet about 10,000 years ago. And then with the introduction of refined and processed carbohydrates, we started seeing more dramatic effects on dental health, like malocclusion, where you don't have enough room in your jaw for all of your teeth to come in. Those are pretty indisputably diseases that are caused by carbohydrate consumption.
So so my thought on carbohydrates is, the way I look at it is they've been with us a long time, and we've had fruit in our diet for thousands of years, at least intermittently. And the wealthy, who we know going all the way back to Egypt, were found to have arteriosclerosis and gallbladder disease. They had access to fruit and sugar, more so than everyone else. And so, of course, they would just indulge whenever they felt like it. And so we have like a long history of knowing that whatever diseases that people were getting, it was generally associated with the consumption of some kind of empty calories. So carbohydrates are empty calories, and that's a very important concept. Is I think that's really one of the two pathways to disease is empty calories or nutrient deficiency, right? Empty calories are fattening. And so that's the way I think about sugar and carbohydrates. And I don't make a huge distinction actually between refined sugar and fruit, because the fruit that we have now has been bred for so many thousands of years to be mostly sugar. It's very devoid in nutrients, especially compared to other, to vegetables and other things in the food supply. So the question was like, when did sugar show up, or what is the problem with processed sugar? Sorry. When did it show up? That was the question. Yeah, so it's been with us forever. But we've been eating proportionately more of it as we've become more civilized, to summarize, to wrap it up there. And is it associated with diseases? It's associated with diseases that relate to nutrient deficiency in general. So yes, I think it's associated with a broad variety of diseases, and even of course obesity too, because empty calories cause obesity. They make you gain weight and they make you sick in a lot of ways.
Right. So I'm asking about the timeline, because you've got, of course, the factor that causes obesity at a society level. It's going to have to precede the actual rise in obesity that we can see recorded in the last 100 years or so. So we have these two agents, sugar and seed oils. And the question is, do both timeline fits perfectly well? Is there one timeline that fits better, and what can we learn from comparing those? Because I think, Tucker, you've mentioned in your blogs that in the, I think it's mid to late 1700s, we started seeing the cottonseed oil, being available for purchase. 1800s.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. We do have a number of examples of societies that eat up to 94% of their diet as refined carbohydrates, and they generally don't get obesity. We don't really start, I mean, there are, instances of people being fat throughout history, but we don't see the sort of pandemic obesity that we see now, where it's occurring in every country, amongst every population, all around the world. That really kicked off with the introduction of what I'll call industrial seed oils, which are, produced en masse from cottonseed or soy or sunflower oil or corn oil. That's a very recent introduction into the human diet. Seed oils on alone go back probably, 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. They were first used as part of the diet in India, and shortly thereafter, the Indians made the discovery of type 2 diabetes. The Indians traded with the Egyptians, and the Egyptians started using seed oils about 2,000 years ago. And shortly after that, they also discovered diabetes, and they discovered heart disease. But they didn't get obesity back then, and it seems to be something to do with the quantity of seed oils that you're consuming. But they did start seeing the chronic diseases back then. Interestingly, at one point in Egypt, it was actually illegal to eat animal fat, and the only fats that were legally available for consumption were seed oils, mainly sesame seed oil.
Interesting. Now, I wasn't aware, they actually did not see type 2 diabetes. So we want to distinguish between type 1 and type 2 diabetes, because type 2 diabetes was not characterized until 1938. And type 2 diabetes...
No, that's not correct. Type 2 diabetes was originally described by an Indian physician almost 2,500 years ago.
Type 2?
Type 2. And he described it by tasting the urine and noting that flies would gather on the sweet urine.
But type 1 that's how you diagnose type 1.
Well, type 2 is also, okay, well, we
You
won't
mean
get
it's an
into that
advanced
right now.
stage? An advanced stage of type 2 is
An
similar to
advanced
type 1 in that
stage,
sense?
yeah, is typified by
Okay.
glycosuria, sweet
Well, I
urine.
don't know that they would have actually had the technology, honestly, but like it would have to be like,
They tasted it
yes, no, but that's how you would diagnose type 1 also. That's actually
also,
how,
right?
yes, right. So, okay, I guess what we're coming to is how would somebody distinguish between type 1 and type 2, before like the current era, right? Where we can do other things like measure an insulin level. And yes, it's true. It would probably be difficult, but I think that it's kind of like a theoretical thing, but in my studying of the medical literature is that it was not described until the late 1930s, and it wasn't tracked statistically until 1958. So we don't have any statistics on it until 1958.
Yeah, Gary Taubes in his Good Calories, Bad Calories did a good analysis of the history of type 2 diabetes in the United States. And he looked at the records from the Boston hospital system. And we really start to see the emergence of diabetes. Back then, it was an extremely rare disease, and we didn't start to see it commonly in a statistical way until the latter part of the 1800s. So I would refer people to that. That's an excellent overview in an extremely fat book.
Right. So,
but it's important because like for my thought process on answering your question is we didn't have type 2 diabetes, at least not according to the medical literature. Now there may be some argument as to maybe we did and we just weren't aware of it in the medical literature, but we didn't have it until after seed oils were pretty much well established in the food supply. And to me, that's an important point because it helps.
Yeah, it became far more common in the modern era. That's absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. I mean, in Taubes's book, he describes, a couple of cases every few years in the early part of the 1800s in the Boston hospital systems. And, I think given the broadest definition of type 2 diabetes today, we're at 50% prevalence in the United States, which is absolutely mind-boggling that this disease has gone from being, in the early part of the 1900s, maybe 1% prevalence to the 50% prevalence it's at today.
Absolutely. And also childhood obesity as well, which was, very, very rare. And now it's an epidemic. And all the associated, so type 2 diabetes is very different than type 1. And type 2 diabetes really is kind of like the grandfather or the Darth Vader of all metabolic disease. And that's why I think it's very unlikely that we really truly had type 2 diabetes. I mean, Gary Taubes notwithstanding, I have my own take on the medical literature, and maybe we won't come to an agreement on that today. But
well, I think you're correct about the distinction between type 1 and type 2 not being made until the early part of the 20th century.
Yeah, I mean, it would be very difficult to actually do that, right? So,
yeah. What's interesting is the Indian physician who described it so long ago prescribed avoiding sweets and exercise.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that would
pretty
work
funny because that's
as well.
I guess the exercise part is still part of the recommendation. The avoiding sweets thing probably should be.
People have been resisting our basic kind of lifestyle advice for centuries. Is what that means.
Exactly.
Yeah. So but I see seed oils as the cause of insulin resistance, which is the precursor to type 2 diabetes. And so without quite a significant amount of seed oils in your diet, I don't see that we get insulin resistance. And that's why I think it's really interesting that when you look at not just the introduction of seed oils, but also the volume, the sheer volume that we're eating, how that has increased dramatically over the course of the last 100 years from maybe like a pound or two a day a pound or two per person per year to where we're at now, which is approaching 80 pounds per
A
person.
pound a day.
Yeah, right. Well, we're getting there. Yeah, right. Almost. It's like 5 ounces of polyunsaturated fatty acids. And I think that's also very important to point out, is that without seed oils, our intake of these types of fatty acids called polyunsaturated fatty acids would not be where it's at today, which is somewhere around 80% of our fat calories, or around 600 to 700 calories per person per day from polyunsaturated fatty acids. And historically, it was probably 1/10 of that at the most. And the key thing to understand is that when you try to burn these polyunsaturated fatty acids for energy, it destroys your mitochondria. And that means that you're destroying your cell's ability to generate energy, and your cells are desperate for energy, and they have to suck in more sugar. And so this is how you get insulin resistance, from too much polyunsaturated fatty acids. And I just can't see any kind of clear explanation for how do you get insulin resistance from just eating sugar, right? Because that, like, the current explanation is, well, it just wears out the system, and that to me doesn't hold, like, because we don't have what happens is you down regulate, right? When you have so much of a hormone flooding your body, let's say I was just going to take, or let's say one of you two guys wanted to take testosterone shots, right, to supplement your testosterone. Well, the shots tend to work to do, all kinds of amazing manly things to your body for a few months, but then your body resists the excessive amount of testosterone and down regulates. So you don't have so many receptors. But that's what would happen with sugar. That's what actually does happen with sugar and with insulin. But what the distinction is that we have insulin resistance. And we get hormone resistance with seed oils that you don't get from just consuming too much carbohydrate. You would get and maybe an excessive amount of insulin, but that excessive amount of insulin is not going to, the body doesn't respond to that by resisting insulin. It responds to it by down regulating the receptors and down regulating the response to it, if that makes sense. But that's it's a little technical, but it's a very, very important distinction, because right now we have so many people talking about how carbs cause sugar, and it's mainstream now, but
Carbs cause insulin resistance. Yes.
Yes. Thank you. But there's no mechanism for it, but we have many explanations in the mechanistic realm for how does polyunsaturated fatty acid end up causing insulin resistance, which is the precursor to type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, I think the best. Sorry, Rafi, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say this leads us into the second question about the big three diseases: heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. So since you started to bring up some mechanisms, maybe you can explain why you guys tend to think that seed oils have a big role to play, not only in the emergence of obesity, but also cancer and diabetes, and give people a general sense of how, there's this link between seed oils and those diseases that everyone fears.
Well, if we look at primitive societies, there are no primitive societies and people fail a glucose tolerance test with an asterisk there, right? And some of these societies, as I said before, get up to 94% of their calories from carbohydrates and a fair bit of sugar. I mean, the population I'm talking to eats sweet potatoes, which have a fairly high amount of just, sucrose, table sugar. What they don't get is diabetes, obese, heart disease, and they have, cancer is very complicated. There are some cancers that are caused by viruses, for instance. So what we'll talk about is what are known as the Western cancers, which are pretty clearly associated with seed oil consumption. So in the 1960s, they discovered a medical product called Intralipid, which is made from soybean oil in 1961. In 1964, a paper was published noting that Intralipid caused insulin resistance. So this is something that's infused into the veins as a means of medical feeding, right? Now, my little asterisk about the primitive populations, the traditional populations, not failing a glucose tolerance test, the only exception to that is the Bushmen in Africa, who would eat a lot of seeds and get an enormous amount of the omega-6 polyunsaturated fats. They fail a glucose tolerance test during the time of the year when they are eating those nuts. They're known as mongongo nuts. So not only do we have that one little exception, but then we have what is now become the standard protocol for inducing insulin resistance in humans experimentally, which is injecting soybean oils into their veins. And interestingly, if you use something like olive oil, which has much less omega-6 fat than a seed oil, it doesn't produce the same reaction. So from a mechanistic standpoint, we have a clear pathway. From epidemiological standpoint, one only has to look at the steadily increasing line of seed oil intake across the 20th century and the steadily increasing incidence of type 2 diabetes. Even the Harvard School of Public Health, which is quite fond of seed oils, has published a paper noting that seed oil consumption in the United States is associated with type 2 diabetes incidence. So there are some caveats and there are some odd statistical manipulations going on, but I think the basic case is quite clear as to causation, as Dr. Shanahan said.
Regarding the cancer question, I think that it's like, how can you overlook the fact that the seed oil scientists themselves are telling us these things contain carcinogens when they come out of the factory? Okay, when they come out of the factory. And then when you cook with them, especially in a deep fryer or in pan frying situation, the polyunsaturated fatty acids continue to oxidize and deteriorate into many more types of carcinogens. So many types that you can't even list them out on a page. You have to use some kind of a complicated spreadsheet scenario. There's many categories of toxins. And I think one of the speakers at this conference is probably going to talk about them, Dr. Groupfeld, because he's done a great job of delineating the many categories of toxins. So we're talking about known carcinogens that are present in foods cooked in seed oils, especially if they're deep fried in seed oils. Known carcinogens, they're not just present, they're not just there in minute amounts, they're there in amounts that exceed acceptable levels by organizations that set these levels, right? And I want to point out something about carcinogens too. I mean, carcinogens, it's hard to get on that list of, cancer causing compounds. So of the many thousands of different toxins that develop when you cook seed oils, only a few of them have actually even really specifically been studied for cancer, right? So it's really, I think, to me, ridiculous to try and argue that seed oils that contain carcinogens don't play a role in the development of cancer. And if I had to estimate, I would say, as a percentage, I would say they could be responsible for as much as 80 to 90% of the cancer now, given the extraordinary amount of consumption that we have in our diet and just how much people are eating out and eating actually the very worst type of seed oils, which is the stuff that's deep fried.
Yeah, and it's important to note that this isn't a hypothetical. The International Agency for Research in Cancer, the IARC, has listed cooking oils as a probable human carcinogen and a known animal carcinogen since 2010. And oddly enough, the cancer that it causes is lung cancer because you breathe in many of the toxins that are in highly heated cooking oils during frying are the same carcinogens that are produced by smoking. Acrolein is probably the best well known. So there's there are a couple of different types of cancers. In lung cancer, the cancers that are caused by smoking cigarettes are primarily found in men who tend to smoke more. Those cancer types are declining. The cancers that are associated with cooking are mostly found in women who don't have to smoke to get these cancers. And that type of cancer is increasing around the world.
Yeah, scary stuff. I mean, you'd have to be kind of, you know, profiting from from the idea that these things are healthy to not see the connection and to not be warning people about the connection. And you know, I think it's outrageous that Harvard and the American Heart Association are still saying that, even in spite of the fact that we have been consuming more and more of these every decade, every year lately, we've been consuming incredibly just accelerating amounts. They're still saying that we need to seek them out, and even greater quantities. Like, how much is enough? Right? We're swimming in this stuff.
And in the case of Harvard, particularly, they've warned against the dangers of consuming fried foods. Right. And I mean, they've released a paper saying that the most obesogenic food in the United States are potatoes fried in seed oils. Potatoes on their own, back to our discussion about what's worse, vegetable oils or carbohydrates, potatoes on their own, or potatoes, you know, cooked in butter, aren't all that obesogenic. But potatoes cooked in seed oils are by several times the most obesogenic food that we know of.
And by the way, most children get most of their so-called vegetables in the form of French fries these days. I was doing a little research on,
it would be
lunches.
funny if that was correlated with the childhood obesity epidemic, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be funny, in a sad.
Yeah,
funny,
exactly.
But I wanted to also point out that, you know, everybody talks about junk food being bad for you. Nobody would argue with that. Nobody in their right mind. But we've been so sloppy about defining what is the nature, what is the reason junk food is bad. And I say it's seed oils, because they're the things that deteriorate in the factory. They deteriorate further in your body into toxins. Like, how can toxins be good for you? I mean, that's what Harvard is actually saying, though. They're saying toxins are good for you. You need more toxins. That's what's going to keep you from having a heart attack. And I mean, it's absolutely beyond absurd in my, I mean, like, how could they sleep at night? Right.
Well, they're cashing their checks from the companies that pay for their research, who are often seed oil manufacturers and seed oil producers. And I know that sounds kind of funny, but when one goes through their papers and looks at the sources of funding, that's consistently been it. So it's sad. You know, one needs to be objective when one is looking at the scientific evidence, and one needs to follow the facts. And unfortunately, too often it's been put in the back seat to financial interests. So that is a problem. And I will say, though, at the same time, while we are talking here about the problems with omega-6 fats and seed oils, that industry has been one of the best research sources for somebody like me, and I'm sure for Dr. Shanahan. They've known for decades about the problems behind omega-6 fats. I mean, the first paper that I read talking about the presence of a carcinogen in French fried potatoes was produced in an industry journal and was done by industry researchers. And they talked about how this could be a major health problem. And industry has for years been trying to reduce the level of omega-6 fats in the products that they're selling. And they're doing this through genetically modifying things like soybean oil, or trying to breed new strains of sunflower oil, which have much less of these omega-6 fats. My favorite industry headline was, GMO soybean oil is less obesogenic than normal soybean oil. So they know what their products are doing, and they are trying to fix it. We shouldn't have to wait for it.
Right. And we don't.
we all don't,
out.
but that's why we're doing this summit, is
Exactly.
to get the word out.
But I want to point out something that about the omega-6 issue. So I would disagree with you, Tucker, to make this conversation interesting, about the omega-6 being the problem. It's the polyunsaturates. It's the total amount of polyunsaturates. Because when you look at the rate of deterioration into toxic compounds of an omega-6 versus an omega-3, the omega-3 deteriorate faster. And they
Indeed.
Yeah. And so, and like they deteriorate into toxins and those are the problems. It's the toxicity, the toxins, the aldehydes and the different ketones and different strange chemicals that form that just cause molecular havoc inside your cell. And
no, I agree with that so far as it goes, but the toxins that are produced from the oxidation of omega-6 fats are far more harmful.
No,
much
actually
more toxic. Yes, that's correct. So if you take, I mentioned that soybean product. If you feed that soybean product to a child or you infuse it into their veins, they will get liver failure fairly quickly. If you take a fish oil and infuse it into their veins, it will not only cure the liver disease, but they can survive for years on it. And there are children who don't have an intestinal tract who have been surviving on fish oil, having had liver failure from soybean oils for years. So yes, there is concern with oxidized fish oils. That's true, but the level of toxicity is far less than in the omega-6 fats.
Well, I don't think that's very likely. And I would take, I would question about like whether they're truly surviving on fish oil or whether they're getting supplemented fish oil with in the context
It's
of
intravenous fish oil.
Right. So, I mean, it's the dose that makes the poison. So I
Yeah,
would doubt that they're giving them more than what they would, be estimated to need, which is just a few grams a day.
It's the sole source of fat calories.
Well, then they may be on a very low fat diet. But it also, the other thing is that
Well, this wouldn't be interesting if we agreed on everything.
Right, exactly. But the fish oil is, if it is going to be used in this fashion, is not subjected to the same kinds of intense heat and pressure that seed oil is. So it has its
Right.
own antioxidants in there still, right? So one of the reasons seed oil is terrible is that anything nutritious is completely stripped out. And that includes a lot of the necessary vitamins that nature puts in there. But that's not the case with fish oil. So
That's absolutely correct. Yes, I agree with that.
Right. So I would think that, that's a very interesting point, but I think in terms of just the chemistry of it says that the polyunsaturated fatty acids, the more unsaturation, the higher the degree of unsaturation, and omega-3 has, 30% more unsaturation for the same chain length. The more quickly it reacts with oxygen, the more unstable, and the more it's going to deteriorate into toxins. And we also have a study showing that when you compare directly head to head, an omega-6 versus an omega-3 in terms of what happens in a mitochondria when you try to, a mitochondria tries to fuel on it, the omega-6 is not as bad. The omega-3 shuts down the mitochondria to maybe, like 10% of what the energy was, whereas the omega-6, it can still produce about 30% of its energy. And it just makes sense biochemically to me. So I think we have to keep in mind that there are so many people that are trying to say that polyunsaturated fatty acids are not bad, or that, even if the omega-6, even if we have an issue with omega-6 to the omega-3 ratio, the solution is just more omega-3, right? So that's all part of the same kind of mentality of we can't accept the fact that these seed oils are just truly toxic, whether it's canola oil, which has a pretty good ratio of 3-6, or soy oil or corn oil, which is mostly 6. But if we were just to have just canola oil in our diet, the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 in canola oil is pretty good. It's like twice as much 6 as 1, which is pretty much approaching what a lot of people estimate we did historically. And so if it was about the ratio and not about the total PUFA, then we should all just be living on canola oil. And I'm not gonna go there.
No, but you're making a good point. Canola oil is certainly one of the better seed oils. I would make another observation that the populations that we've seen that consume large amounts of fish, like the Japanese or the Inuit, were getting a lot of omega-3 fats, and they were not seeing the chronic diseases that we see with the introduction of seed oils into their diets. And whether that's just
that's food.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
They're
totally
consuming it as
thing.
food, and they're
something
getting
that
the
comes out of the
antioxidants
factory.
along with it also, right?
So we can't compare that. We can't compare the omega-3. So that's nutritional reductionism. And that's why it gets a little dangerous to look at the small picture. I always like to look at the big picture as much as possible. And right, so when we're eating stuff that is, we can't ignore the fact that the seed oils come out of factories and they are stripped of nutrients. So it's totally different than sushi, right? You can't compare seed oil to sushi.
Although similar to fish oils.
Similar, yes, because fish oils too deteriorate, and fish oils
Right.
in some studies increase mortality because they specifically increase the risk of atrial fibrillation and sudden cardiac death. So
yes, I agree with that. Although we're getting a little off topic on the chronic disease.
I think it's important to talk about this issue because it's a side issue. And seed oils are toxic because of the polyunsaturates, not because of the ratio. And that we have to start from that conversation and not start with the conversation the American Heart Association, Harvard, and other people who want us to have, which is, oh no, it's about the ratio. So like that's
well, and that's a really great point to make. And that gets us back to, if you look at the Japanese and the rate of increase in chronic diseases over there, you can't, as one scientist put it to me, you can't eat enough fish to outcompete the omega-6 fats and seed oils, right? So you can increase your ratio to something that looks more appropriate from a evolutionary standpoint, and you will still suffer from the chronic diseases that we associate with these seed oils, right? So that's a very important point to make. Also, the beneficial omega-6 fats in your body are actually reduced by an increased consumption of the omega-6 fats. So the scientists will tell you that if you're looking to increase your omega-3 levels in your blood, and there are reasons why you would want to do that, the only two known ways to do it is to supplement with omega-3 fats or to reduce your omega-6 consumption.
Right. It's a funny way of putting it though, but because it's really to reduce your PUFA consumption, your total PUFA consumption. So there was a study that somebody at the National Institute of Health named Chris Ramsden did, where he cut out just the omega-6 and didn't increase people's he cut out, the total PUFA. You can't separate total PUFA from omega-6. And I think that's a problem that is causing a lot of confusion from what you're saying, why there's a difference between what you're saying and what I'm saying. You can't, because most of our PUFA comes from omega-6, right? So but truly, when you look at the studies, you find that the reason that we have a supposed correlation, the reason that Harvard and folks will say that the more polyunsaturated fatty acids, even specifically Harvard points at studies that say the more omega-6, the more linoleic acid that you have, the less likely you are to have insulin resistance. That's because when you have such a huge total body burden of PUFA, your omega-3 levels decline first, and then your omega-6 levels decline, just because you have depleted your body of antioxidants. And that's a very, very important concept that I don't see anybody really talking about, but it's the same thing that happens in a deep fat fryer. In a deep fat fryer, we don't get these toxins forming all the acroleins and all the carcinogens and cyclic things, cyclic amines and so on. You don't get them forming in the first minute that you pour it into the fryer. There's a lag time. And what's happening in that lag time before the toxins really start going crazy and the things start deteriorating is that the antioxidants are protecting the PUFA. And the same thing happens in our body. And that's why that's why it's so confusing to look at Harvard's research, because they're biased and they're wanting to see it one way. And they keep pointing out the little tiny slivers of the picture that support their thinking. But that's because in some level, you can easily find associations where people who are healthier will have higher omega-3, not because they eat more omega-3, but because they have more antioxidants, right? And so does that make sense? They're not eating more omega-3, but they actually have more antioxidants because they're not eating so much total PUFA.
Right. So I actually maybe that's going to be your big takeaway, Dr. Shanahan. I was going to ask as my last question while we wrap up here, what's your big takeaway that you want people to take from this discussion? I guess you can go first, Tucker, and then Dr. Shanahan.
Well, one thing we didn't really get into is that there's a definite cross effect between carbohydrate consumption and vegetable oil consumption. Carbohydrates don't seem to be so bad absent vegetable oils in the diet. So while if you are, say, a type 2 diabetic, then cutting your cutting your carbohydrate consumption is going to improve your disease state because you have been rendered unable to process carbohydrates. From a longer term perspective, cutting seed oils is going to hopefully allow your body to start to revert to a more healthy state, which is why we see, people like Verta who have an extremely good track record so far of putting diabetes into remission. They are simultaneously telling people to reduce their consumption of seed oils and to reduce their carbohydrate consumption. And I think it's important for people to understand that those two work together, but that the seed oils seem to be the ones that are driving the disease states.
Absolutely. And I guess if I wanted to leave with one thing, I would say there is nothing more important that you can do than cutting out seed oils, right? If you have to choose between cutting out carbs or sugar and cutting out seed oils, cut out the seed oils for sure. And I've also found that, most people, the reason that a keto diet is actually something I recommend is because it's one of the only popular diets that specifically tells people to seek out fats that are not seed oils. They specifically say, eat eggs, eat cheese, eat butter, right? Use coconut oil. And I think that's a huge reason for the success of the keto diet, that kind of cutting out carbs is getting credit for a lot of work that cutting out seed oils is a lot of the benefits that cutting out seed oils actually gives you.
We've seen that a keto diet based on seed oils actually makes people ill immediately. So it's one of the reasons why it doesn't work, why you don't see a lot of that, is people do get sick on it pretty quickly.
Right. And when people fail the keto diet, a lot of times, I've heard it's because, I didn't know I shouldn't eat mayonnaise, or, I didn't know I couldn't have deep fried vegetables, for example. Right. So
so there's definitely a synergy there, and I think that a good intervention is probably going to pull on both of those levers to help people, because there's a lot of people out there who need that help. So thank you so much, Tucker and Dr. Shanahan, for your time today. I just want to remind everyone where they can find you on Twitter. So I know, Tucker, you're at Tucker Goodrich.
At Tucker Goodrich, very simple.
There, and Dr. Shanahan, what's your handle on Twitter?
At Dr. Kate Shanahan, not very simple.
Okay.
I always get confused about the doctor. It's DR.
Right. Okay. And I just wanted to reiterate that this has been a really interesting conversation from my end. And thanks for taking the time and giving me all the detailed explanations. So, I think it's really important to have this conversation because we need to shine a spotlight on sugar and seed oils to help listeners make smarter choices around food. So to our audience, we hope you took away as much as we did from the conversation. Don't forget to tune into the next upcoming presentation and rest that are scheduled for the summit today. If you know someone who may want to join the summit, you can send them to thefutureoffat.org where they can register for free entry. Be sure to follow along with the speakers on their social channels, which you can see on the screen. And we hope you have a great rest of your day. And thank you for tuning in. Enjoy the remainder of the Future of Fat Summit.
Thank you.
Thanks.